being a social skills coach, it's a lot like being a doctor in the ER. Ever since I started doing this, I've had people come into my programs in an absolute panic on a weekly basis about a variety of things, from crippling social anxiety to I can't hold people's attention to I run out of things to say, and yada, yada, yada. And these are basically the equivalents of the gunshot wounds, the car accidents, and the strokes that are wheeled into the average emergency room on a nightly basis. Now, over the course of this 20-year journey I've been on, I've developed a reputation as a coach that can fix most social problems. And I like that reputation as well. And it's been a really, really, really long time since I've encountered somebody with such a unique social problem that I wasn't able to fix very, very fast. Usually taking a live training can fix even the most hardcore problems by pumping up your confidence, by instilling new belief systems, or sometimes just smacking you in the head and turning you around 180 degrees if you're facing in the wrong direction. Sometimes, however, we got to go right to the heart of the problem and rearrange things from the ground up. Right? Very often, the problems people face are just plain fundamental. And it's pretty simple when you get a client who is a little bit more socially savvy, because you don't really have to get into all the wax on, wax off basic stuff with them. But when you do have somebody who's a complete novice, it's kind of like you're starting a race 10 feet behind the starting line. You got to play catch up, and you got to play it very, very quickly. So like a doctor seeing someone being wheeled to the ER, I've learned how to do a very basic checkup on the vital signs of the patient. And I have a checklist in my head that I developed long, long ago, back in the day when I first started, when I was still astonished at how fundamental the solutions to a lot of problems are. And this checklist served me very, very well back then, and it continues to serve me very well to this day, because the fundamentals have not changed since then, nor will they ever. So this checklist should be very beneficial to you as well. So let's get right into it. Quick fix number one is vocal projection and vocal tonality. Very often I get students on program and I'm talking to them in the introductory pre-brief stage, and that'll often be in a hotel lobby. It's very quiet. I say, "What's your name?" They're like, "My name's John." "Oh, sorry, what's your name? What do you do for a living? Where are you from?" "My name's John. I'm from Wichita." And it's like, "Can you speak up a little bit? I can't hear you." And this is really problematic, and I know that it's going to continue to be an issue going forward over the course of the weekend, because if I can't hear you speaking to me from 5 feet away in a quiet hotel lobby, how do you expect people to hear you speaking to them, say, in a bar or at a loud house party or even at a networking event at some convention? They're going to be like, "What?" And the second that somebody has to say to you, "What?" when you're introducing yourself to them, it's basically over. And this is a problem that I've noticed rear its head in my life as well to this very day. Sometimes I go out to a venue and it's a bit loud and I haven't calibrated my voice to that level yet, and I introduce myself to somebody and they ask me, "What?" And I realize, oh, not loud enough, and I fix it right then and there, but the damage is done. That bad first impression has been made. I think a lot of the issue is simply that people don't know how to project their voice with power in a clear way. And I did a program called RESONATOR with my voice coach, Susan Nance. You may have heard of this, that deals in how to actually do healthy, attractive, powerful tone production. But beyond that, there's a lot of inhibition around using your voice in certain ways that might be more attractive due to various negative social counter conditionings. Again, volume is only one aspect of language musicality, right? There's other variables as well, like pitch, speed, rhythm, different tone colors that you can put on it. A lot of people tend to speak not necessarily in a monotone, but in sort of very predictable, repetitive cadencing that's just kind of boring, and it's not very interesting. They'll be like da 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 da. Or, you know, a lot of times I had a student this past weekend who he spoke in what we call a trying for rapport tonality, where it sort of lilts up at the end. It's kind of like, "So how are you guys doing? How's your night? Da 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 da." And it's got this questioning tone where it's like, "Do you like it? Is it okay if I say this? Do you accept me? Please like me," right? And I told him, well, maybe you want to start thinking about speaking in more of like a neutral tonality, like da da da, or even more of a breaking rapport tonality that's a little more got a cocky, a little bit of a kind of like a cocky element to it. Like, "Hey, how's it going? Good evening." Now, beyond that, if you listen to me speaking right here, I'm coloring my voice as I speak these very words, and I'm putting a lot of different tone color on it. It's going up, it's going down, I'm making pauses. And the reason that I'm able to do this, I'm not thinking of how to color these words in advance, right? There's not some predictive control at play here, right? Your voice, your face, your physicality all have a certain intuition of what feels right to express. But the problem is we very often don't trust these intuitive impulses because the mind wants to step in and judge first before it's allowed external access. It's like, is this going to be accepted? Is this going to be seen as silly? Is this going to be seen as pushy or aggressive or any number of things? And unfortunately, there's no time out in actual interactions for you to make that evaluation, right? So you got to learn to sort of allow these intuitive understandings to the fore. Right? So a lot of people have, again, like a very stifled vocal tonality, and that's one of the very first things that I check for. Number 2 on this triage checklist is smoothing out jittery motions and looking for physical tension. Right? A lot of people, they come on the program and they'll have like kind of jittery, spastic movements, jerky hand gestures, they're shifting from foot to foot, there's weird finger hand activity, or in kind of a same but different situation, just any sort of generalized held tension, right? Jaw clenching, weird facial darting activity, held hunched shoulders, locked knees, hands in pockets, closed body language. So what you got to understand here is tension is the enemy. If there's one sort of like generalized tenet of my programs, it's tension is the enemy. And that's both physical tension as well as intellectual language-based densities. So basically the control pattern is as follows. Intellect senses, I'm about to go talk to somebody, I'm about to introduce myself to somebody new. Oh, that might not be good. We need to shut that down. And how does it do that? It shuts it down by calling into play physical tension as its enforcer. And the onset of this tension can be very subtle, almost subliminal, to the degree where you're not even aware that it's grabbed hold of you until it's too late. So very often it can be useful to do what we call a tension check. And if you'll see me out in the crowd or in a venue, you'll notice I'm always kind of loose. I'm moving to the beat of the music in the environment. I'm trying to maintain a loose physicality as a way to prevent that creeping, subtle, subliminal onset of physical tension that accompanies social anxiety. So this is something that I'm always looking for, and I'll very often grab students and physically loosen them up. I'll remind them to stay loose. And that's the second point on the checklist. Number 3 on the checklist is be more playful. In other words, why so serious? A lot of people that come on the program, they're extremely logical. They're looking at this situation as though it's almost a life or death situation. They're certainly not enjoying themselves in the environment, and this can be the death knell for any interaction. Now look, logic's great. If you're like most people, logic serves you in 95% of the interactions that you have in your day-to-day life, right? You need to be pretty serious, okay, respond in a serious manner, but especially when you're trying to meet people out in social settings, whether it's a party, whether it's some venue, some nightlife venue, or even at a picnic, a family reunion, it doesn't matter. Those people are trying to unwind. They're trying to unwind from their stressful work week. They're not trying to have a serious discussion about geopolitical maneuvering or the state of the economy or anything like this necessarily. Now you could get there, but again, at least initially, most people, they're just trying to have fun. So it's kind of interesting when you're going up and you're viewing these interactions as something with a high stakes outcome, you're basically subcommunicating, oh golly, I hope it works. Now, one of the main tenets of social interaction is whatever you feel, they feel, right? Whatever you feel through this sort of mirror neuron experience, they're going to get a whiff of that feeling. And if they're just trying to unwind from their stressful work week and you're not contributing to that, you're going up and you're being serious, they're going to start to feel serious too, and they're most likely going to want to remove themselves from the situation. Furthermore, if you're going up and subcommunicating that like, oh golly, I hope it works, again, what does that suggest? It suggests, well, maybe it doesn't work for this person usually. This person's worried about the outcome. Maybe I should be concerned too. So it's very, very important that you find a way to sort of let go of that logic. Don't be so serious and just goof around. And don't be worried about being perceived as silly or foolish. Number 4 on the checklist is focus all of your mental energy on the task at hand. So when you're talking to someone, you got to say, where is your focus? Is your focus internal? Are you judging yourself in process, or is your focus external? Or rather, is it inclusionary or is it exclusionary? Most of the time, you want to have an inclusionary awareness where you're focused on the other person in front of you and you're being present to the moment. Very often, people are in their head and they're judging in process, which is antithetical to best result. Right? Let me say that again. Judging in process is antithetical to your best result. Now, I get it, especially when you're first learning this stuff. You got to understand, yes, there is a lot of technique involved to specific types of interactions. If you're selling and closing sales, there are certain waypoints you want to hit. If you're trying to, make a connection with somebody romantically with someone you just met, there's certain conventions and waypoints of those types of interactions. You do have to kind of monitor that. And I understand, especially when you're first starting out, that is going to take a little bit of bandwidth, right? Because you're in that stage of conscious competence. If you're unfamiliar with the 4 quadrants of competence, you've got unconscious incompetence where you suck and you have no idea. You've got conscious incompetence where you suck, you're aware of it, you start to make changes. Conscious competence where, okay, I can do it if I pay close attention while I'm doing it. And then ultimately you get to unconscious competence where, again, the technique, you have such a familiarity with it that it no longer requires much of the intellect's conscious attention. That's what you're aiming for. And I understand, it can be difficult when you're not quite there yet, but that's what you're aiming for. So how do you get there? Well, again, mass repetition of social interaction will familiarize you with those techniques until you get to that point where you don't really need to pay so much attention to it anymore, right? And at that point, you can hit a flow state, right? You hit a flow state where you just kind of allow that synergistic wisdom of the whole to take over. You allow your experience to guide you. You trust your faculties, and you just kind of let it happen through you. And that's a very exhilarating experience. And quite honestly, for people who are not accustomed to that, for people who are accustomed to having to monitor everything and be in control all the time, it can be kind of scary when that happens because it feels like you've lost control, and in a sense, you have. During that time when you're out there socializing, you need to just let go and just enjoy the process and not be so focused on generating performance product results, which is kind of difficult, quite frankly, because particularly with dating because it's so results oriented, but it's absolutely essential. So it's a bit of a paradox and kind of a mind fuck, frankly, but you've got to drop the judgment because that's what's causing all of the inhibition in the first place, right? Judging in process. Checklist point number 5, how good is their frame control and their ability to lead the conversation? I think that there's 2 things that are extremely important, 2 skills that are essential for you to be good socially. Number 1 is learning the command, look here, and that's accomplished by generating a fun, cool vibe that's very compelling. And number 2 is the ability to lead the conversation in the direction that you want it to go, right? So sometimes this means that when people are giving you grief, you don't acknowledge what they're saying. You don't respond logically. And understand, you are under no obligation whatsoever to respond logically to anything that anyone says to you in a social situation. Now, again, if it's your boss and they're asking information about the reports from last quarter, yeah, you should probably respond logically. But if you're out at a party and somebody's like, why did you say this thing? And you start to be like, well, here's the reasons why, and I apologize. That's only gonna make it worse, right? Instead, say some flippant, over-the-top comment and then change the subject completely. Plow it in a completely different direction, right? Speak with authority as though you believe that your worldview is the only correct one. Don't be a little bit afraid to break rapport and change the subject and not respond so logically to everything. Because again, you are under no obligation whatsoever to respond logically to anything anybody says to you or asks of you in a social situation. Number 6, are you moving things forward? Have you ever seen the classic film Glenn Ross starring Alec Baldwin, where he has this obnoxious speech to these salesmen. You're probably familiar with the phrase, always be closing. ABC, always be closing. So in an interaction, I see a lot of time people, they're in there and they're just kind of like hanging out, having a nice time, and that's great, but they're never moving it towards their goal, whether that goal is signing the new client, whether that goal is going somewhere else with someone they just met to the after party. They never actually move it along. Now, to be fair, I think that a lot of people do have like a misconception that all of these interactions happen like within 10 minutes. I meet someone in 10 minutes and then we're out in 10 minutes. And I think that's pretty unrealistic. Those things do happen from time to time, but generally things are going to take a little longer to unfold in the real world. However, you should always be moving it forward, kind of like, almost like a glacier. It's inevitable and it just keeps on coming, right? So I think that in any interaction, kind of the question is, what happens next? And you want to move things from event to event, whether those events are emotional, whether those events are physical, in a fairly methodical way, right? Or at least a conscious way, and not just hope that things resolve themselves of their own accord. Now, this is kind of interesting because a lot of people, when we talk about vibing, they're like, well, I'm just vibing, and they have a difficult time reconciling what vibing exactly means, because for them it seems like it's not actually moving anything forward. It seems like they're just sort of like reveling in this narrative stasis, and it's not going forward. So yes, you need vibe, but then the second aspect, the second axis, if you will, is that horizontal plot development. So a lot of people have difficulty reconciling this. Well, how much do I vibe? How much do I move it forward? Well, these things can seem like seeming opposites, right? And in this field of study, if you will, there's a lot of these so-called opposites that present themselves, right? Do I go direct? Do I go indirect? Do I go playful? Do I go serious? Do I go high energy? Do I go in with more repose? Am I more disciplined about my approach? Or do I kind of go more improvisational and more freedom? Do I just vibe, or do I move things forward? Well, one thing that I've always said is this. Anytime you are faced with one set of seeming opposites like this, understand that the greatest point of vitality along a spectrum of opposites is through the interaction of the poles. Therefore, you must find the progression implicit in the vibe and also find a sense of lyric or emotional depth in those moments of progression. Without the ability to reconcile these two, your interactions can seem overeager, pushy, repetitive, or they can just be kind of boring and fizzle out. Okay? However, the checkpoint here still remains. Are you moving things forward? Checkpoint number 7, facial expressivity. Now, this is very similar to the vocal expressivity that we talked about at the very top of this checklist. The face, the voice, and the body, these are the three main instruments that we use to communicate. When I say the voice, we're talking about vocal tonality as distinct from verbal meaning, but the face is possibly the most powerful communicator of all, because you're using this, not just the eye focus process, but also the muscles of the face surrounding the eyes to convey specific packets of emotional information. Unfortunately, a lot of people have massive inhibition around expressing in the face because, I mean, let's face it, no pun intended, there's a lot of, again, we're using the face to send very vulnerable and intimate messages about what we think and feel inside. Again, the eyes are the windows to the soul. We've all heard that. And then when you add in the wrinkle of you're talking to someone that you feel has some value and you want to move it towards a specific direction and own that intention, even more inhibition can be triggered. So very often I see people have what we call sad face, right? Serious, anxious, deadpan. They're like, this is serious business. This interaction is very serious. Anxious, I hope it works. Deadpan, what I don't show can't hurt me. Right, they have the seeming inability to smile naturally. There's no indication of any thought process behind the eyes, and it becomes this sort of dead, cadenced stare that, if it's not creepy, it's just straight up uninteresting. And so, again, they're like, why can't I hold people's attentions? Well, your face is very inexpressive. Now, it's important to note that you got to persist when we're trying to chip away at facial armoring, right? It's not going to happen overnight. I mean, it took decades to install these inhibitions, And you're not going to suddenly drop all facial armoring and become facially free because you now intellectually understand it would be beneficial for you to do so. But it's definitely something that you want to think about, because I think that, again, this is one of the most fundamental issues. I'm always telling people, you got to smile more. I want to see more facial expressivity. And they'll go up and they'll try it a little bit, and then drop it. And again, a big part of the teaching that we do involves making people experientially aware of the gap between what they think they're projecting and what's being perceived by other people. And very often that gap involves facial armoring. Okay? Point number 8, check your body language. And again, very similar to the voice and very similar to the face, many people often have a very tense and held body language, closed off. And when we're talking about body language, we're talking about a variety of things, from posture, your connection to the ground, which generates all the power in your expression, to proximity, to gesture, to touch. And again, look here, understand the face, the voice, and the body all have intuitive understandings of how to express in a way that is truthful and beautiful, right? That completes, there's a certain sense of completing an incomplete gestalt. Like again, when I made that little hand gesture there, completing an incomplete gestalt, like I didn't plan that out in advance. That was my kinesthetic intuition coming to the fore with what just seemed right to express. But unfortunately, many people are cut off from that. So what do you see? Hands in pockets, closed body language, standing really, really far away from people, not squaring up. In other words, not standing dead in front of people, kind of standing to the side as a way to kind of deflect anxiety or uncomfortableness and not face up to it. So again, that's another thing that I check right off the bat, is body language issues. And last but not least, coming in at number 9 is, are you playing a character when you're interacting with people? In other words, are you being your authentic self and showing your real personality, or are you trying to put on some sort of vaudeville show that you think they're going to like? And this is one of the classic 3 fatigues that I've talked about over the years. The first being judgment fatigue. You know, again, judging in process, causing, like, I suck, that sucked, what am I doing wrong? That burns a lot of mental energy. The second being hesitation fatigue. You want to go speak to somebody, but you kind of stutter step and second guess yourself. That burns a lot of energy. And the third is putting on this character, right? Now, what's interesting, and this is something I've said again and again and again, you've probably heard me say this before, when I go out, I'm not trying to find 10 people that think I'm sort of okay. I'm trying to find one that thinks I'm awesome. And in order to find somebody that thinks I'm awesome, I've got to be me. And I've got to come to grips with the fact that I'm for some, I'm not for others. Not everyone's gonna like me, but when I do find that person that likes me, that chemistry is gonna be 10 times more powerful, and it's gonna eliminate a lot of the nonsense that comes in social interactions when you're not being yourself, right? There's a massive power in authenticity, and people respect it. People are like, wow, this person's not afraid to be themselves 100%. This is a breath of fresh air, quite frankly, because when you're going up and you're putting on that character, you're essentially subcommunicating. I don't think people would like the real me. And there's a certain air of desperation that permeates the interaction. And there's perhaps no more unattractive characteristic than neediness. So drop the character, be yourself 100%, and let the chips fall where they may, because when you find those people that you do have chemistry with, the attraction is going to be 10 times more powerful. So anyway, that's the checklist. I'm not suggesting that you write this down and carry it around with you, or that it's some kind of comprehensive cure-all, but these are just the most common mistakes that I see guys making. So do a quick inventory right now and see if you're guilty of any of these. Now, if you have a lot of experience, this might seem a little simplistic, but there is no doubt that the fundamentals are what get violated most. And beyond that, you know, these fundamentals have stood the test of time since time immemorial, and they're not going to change anytime soon. So again, use this checklist on yourself and do it time and time again when you're doing triage, so to speak, on your social skills. And you'll be surprised how frequently the answer is the simplest thing in the world. It's been Jeffy, and I'll see you next time. Jeffy.